Now let's take a look at primary trend lines as we continue learning about how to use primary trend lines to get in and out of stocks, but mostly to get in stocks that have been basing for a while and we want to find an entry point. So remember, if you have an all-time high, like in this particular example, an all-time high on price, this is a closing price. Every time you draw a trend line, let's say there, this trend line here now becomes a primary trend line because it's connecting you to these highs here. So this was a nice entry point, moving the stock from about lower 20s all the way to about 80. Why do you get that big thrust? Because you're blasting out of a primary trend line. There's also another way you can draw this. They don't have to be always slanting down. You can draw them in this particular example here, almost straight line, connecting the monthly closing highs. These are monthly closing highs in this video, so they can give you longer term monthly look in what's going on in a stock. So that was an entry point because you take the monthly closing high there and here, draw a straight line. That was a nice entry point. There was also a nice entry point if you take a look at the RSI. This was an all-time high previously in the mid-90s. Draw a straight line connecting the tops. Once you broke down here, that was a primary trend line break on the RSI, which also happens to be around this area here. Down the road, we would get another RSI primary trend line breakout if you connect the tops. So we're talking about, so this is a coming into the late 2000s. This is the high on the RSI, that high, and this double top, draw a straight line that connects all that. Once you break out of that line, which is a primary trend line breakout, very powerful, which is this entry point here, also happens to coincide with price. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Maybe sometimes you get only price breakout on a primary trend line or the RSI. This time you have both price breakout and the RSI. That was good for a very nice move as we discussed earlier. Now what is curious here is that even though the stock has moved from, let's say, this lower 20s again all the way to the 70s, we have not seen a primary trend line break in the stock. So the stock, to me, notice there's a, this is the all-time high in price. So draw a straight line. Actually, let me draw that a different way because I need to connect the closing prices. We are looking at is a closing prices there on a monthly basis, closing price there on a monthly basis. So if we draw a straight line, see that it connects that point, and then you go down and connect to this monthly closing high here. So this was actually going to be resistance or a breakout. So the only way you can get a primary trend line break in this stock is if it can break out above this 70 area, something it hasn't done. And you can see that the all-time high here and the RSI has yet to give us any new all-time high breakout. So the stock is not going to give us any all-time high breakout. So if you're looking for a stock that is going to blast for you, this is not the one, because right now it cannot give you a primary trend line entry because the highs are over here, and any trend line that can take place has to be on the price here or above this line on the RSI, which seems very unlikely at this particular point. Let's take a look at the next example here. Just another stock that I found, closing high on a monthly basis. So there is a primary trend line breakout somewhere here. Now this one was not very successful. As you can see, you did not lose money, but over the next couple of months you saw the stock move from $8, $9 there all the way to about 14, you know, about what, 60% gain? Not too bad. All right, here's an all-time high. Why is this the important RSI? This RSI point is important because it connects to the price highs, all-time price highs. So this RSI area becomes important. So if you draw a line, see that there was a trend line break somewhere around here, or you can even draw it slightly above that here, which happens to be this same time period. Okay, so let's do another trend line. There's a trend line taking that high, in the monthly chart, draw a straight line, and you get a trend line somewhere here. Or if you draw it another way, whoops, comes somewhere around here. So that you either have an entry point here or here. In any event, you own the stock from about, let's say, $7, $8, all the way to currently trading just under 20, because you understood the primary trend line. And of course there's another primary trend line. If you get the high, oops, see that there was an entry point here. Let's take a look at what the MACDs were doing, because this can help you in identifying strong opportunities. And you can see the MACDs were not disappointing. Highs there in the MACD. So let's find so draw a straight line. You can see coming into 2010, 2011, the stock was a buy and also moving above zero. And also this other MACD line, draw a straight line, you see that there was another entry point in the stock at the beginning of 2012, which actually corresponds to this breakout here. So even the MACDs were giving us primary trend line breakout buy signals, which are very powerful. On to the next idea here, or example, and we're just talking about primary lines. In the 90s, that was a high. Draw a straight line. This is an entry point there. Draw another straight line. Connecting the monthly closing highs, you get another entry point here, and you get a nice move in this particular period here. All right. Again, take this high, which is an all-time high in price on a closing basis. Draw another straight line. Once you broke out here, you are availing yourself to good moves. So you had this run up here in the coming months and weeks, even not years, and also a breakout here, another entry point here. Remember, all this is a monthly chart, so it's telling you what's going to happen to the stock in the coming months. That's why it's important. So the stock would go on and make a new all-time high. So once you make a new all-time high, this becomes where you can find primary trend lines. There's a nice primary trend line breakout there. So this becomes a nice entry point here at about $3. Okay, the stock never looks back. We have another primary trend line breakout. If you connect the highs there, here. And you can also argue there was another primary trend line here that was not very successful. But now let's see what the RSI. So this RSI here is important because it connects the all-time high. Makes sense? This RSI node is important because it connects all-time high. So draw a straight line, and you can see the next time the stock was a really good buy was when the RSI was also breaking out. So RSI breakout above that primary trend line, and also price breakout above this primary trend line. So you have two things going on. Beginning of 2013, you got a RSI breakout, you got a price breakout. So that has moved the stock from $10 to about 21 over the last 6 months or so. Let's take a look at what the MACDs were doing. And as you can see, the MACDs did not disappoint because the MACDs were giving you a very important buy signal, all-time high. Take a look at this trend line break. There's also a crossover above zero. We discussed previously that a crossover above zero is always going to be a strong buy signal. So that's a good signal. Also breaking out above a primary trend line here, very important. And also this is important high in the MACD because it connects the all-time highs. Draw a straight line. And so that was confirmed with another entry point there. Remember, my charts have two MACD settings, so don't get confused. I usually have a MACD setting on that setting, and the other is just the main MACD. So those also could have given you a nice entry point. Let's take a look at one more. We're taking a look at Amgen here, and you can see that was an all-time high there, all-time high there on the RSI. It's not an all-time high on the RSI, but it is significant because this area here on the RSI corresponds to a high in price, which is significant. So next time when you break out here, that's a good entry point, which also corresponds to this price breakout here. Now I can also extend this line slightly, and you can see that it actually does come and connect to the RSI high here. So all these things work, the lines work, and it's incredible how they work. So I guess the purpose of this video was just to reinforce the fact that whenever you're looking at a stock chart, be aware of the fact that there are trend lines that are more important to the stock than you would think. Not all trend lines are made the same. Take the highs here, particularly on the MACDs. Draw a straight line. See that there was an entry point somewhere here. The stock would move higher. Also, the other MACD was showing that the next serious buy point was during this breakout. Why was it serious? Because you have a primary trend line here which is broken to the upside. You have a primary trend line here which is broken to the upside with a also, and very important, the MACDs were also moving above zero. This move above zero is probably one of the most important things. And also take note of things like a wedge. There is a wedge here and then a blast. So this becomes a critical entry point. That would have helped you identify this as a nice entry point for Amgen under $60. You would have had an opportunity of at least riding some of this move all the way to the 120s. Eric Mwade, good luck, peace, and blessing.